My stepfather called me worthless at graduation, so I saved his voicemail for the day I bought his dream house. The call came 30 minutes after I walked across the stage. Mom had already fled the ceremony with another of her mysterious migraines, but I knew she couldn't bear watching Dalton's expression during my valedictorian speech. He'd spent 4 years telling everyone at the country club that my education was money flushed down the toilet. "You think that piece of paper makes you somebody?" His voice was soaked in whiskey and contempt. "You're still the same pathetic kid who couldn't start a lawnmower. That fancy diploma won't change what you really are. A worthless disappointment who'll come crawling back here begging for handouts within 6 months." I sat alone in my cap and gown in the empty gymnasium parking lot and pressed record on my phone. Dalton had bulldozed into our quiet life when I was 14, bringing his construction empire and hair-trigger rage. He owned the biggest development company in 3 counties, but he obsessed over one prize he couldn't claim, the antebellum mansion on Magnolia Street. The Ashworth family had owned it for 5 generations. "That house deserves an owner who understands real craftsmanship," he'd growl every Sunday, deliberately slowing his Mercedes as we passed the wrought iron gates. "Mark my words, I'll make those blue bloods an offer they can't possibly refuse." He made certain I understood I'd never merit anything that magnificent. When I earned admission to Harvard with a full scholarship, he dismissed it as affirmative action. When I graduated magna cum laude, he insisted they probably curved grades for sob stories. His poisonous voicemail became my daily motivation. I played it during endless all-nighters in law school, throughout grueling bar exam preparation, and during my first soul-crushing years at a white shoe firm. Dalton's venom powered every brutal 18-hour workday. 9 years later, I made equity partner. My first phone call was to my real estate attorney. The Ashworth mansion had discreetly appeared on the market. The asking price was astronomical, but I'd been living like a graduate student, banking every bonus while Dalton paraded his wealth. I submitted an offer 40% above asking, complete cash purchase. Closing was scheduled for Wednesday. Tuesday night, I drafted a brief email to Dalton. The subject line read simply, "Appreciation." I attached the executed deed, final closing documents, and one carefully preserved audio file. His graduation night voicemail, saved for 9 years. Wednesday morning, standing in my new hand-carved mahogany foyer, my phone began ringing incessantly. Dalton's contact flashed across the screen. "You arrogant little," he began, his voice trembling with uncontrolled fury. "Thank you," I interrupted calmly, "for teaching me precisely what I was worth." Dead silence filled the line. That evening, Mom appeared at my ornate front entrance. She was clutching a water-stained manila envelope, mascara streaking down her pale cheeks. "He's vanished," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Cleaned out our accounts and disappeared completely. But before he left, he confessed something about your biological father that changes absolutely everything." Her hands trembled violently as she extended the envelope toward me. "The architect who designed this house, he was your real father, and Dalton's known the truth since our very first date." I stared at the envelope, my hands refusing to move. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, each note echoing through the vast rooms like gunshots. Mom stood on my doorstep, shivering despite the warm evening air. "What do you mean he's known?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom stepped inside without invitation, her eyes scanning the intricate crown molding and hand-painted ceiling medallion. "Dalton researched you before he ever asked me out. He knew exactly who your father was." The envelope felt heavier than it should have when I finally took it. The paper was yellowed with age, and my name was written across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. Elegant architectural lettering that belonged in a blueprint. "His name was Theodore Ashworth," Mom said, settling into one of the velvet wingback chairs I'd bought at auction. "Teddy to his friends. He designed this house in 1847 for his own family." My legs gave out. I sank onto the Persian rug, still clutching the envelope. "Theodore died when you were 3 months old," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Construction accident on one of his projects. I was 22, alone and terrified. I never told you about him because I thought it would only make things harder. But Dalton knew. Dalton knew everything." Her laugh was bitter. "He'd done a complete background check before our first coffee date. He knew about Teddy, about the Ashworth family, about this house. He deliberately pursued me because of who your father was." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were architectural drawings, original blueprints for the mansion I was sitting in. But there were also photographs. A tall man with dark hair and my exact eyes, standing beside construction workers, pointing at building plans. A birth certificate with Theodore James Ashworth listed as my father. A death certificate dated 3 months after my birth. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Because Dalton made me promise I never would. He said the Ashworth family would try to take you away from me if they knew you existed. He convinced me that keeping you ignorant was protecting you." A photograph fell from the stack of papers. It showed Teddy holding a baby, me, in front of a half-constructed mansion. On the back, someone had written, "Teddy and his daughter at the future family home, 1995. He built this house for us." I whispered. "He built it for you," Mom corrected. "He always said his daughter would live here someday. He had such plans for your future." The room spun around me. Everything I thought I knew about my life was crumbling. Dalton hadn't just married my mother by coincidence. He'd hunted us down specifically because of who I was. "There's more," Mom said quietly. From her purse, she pulled out a phone, Dalton's phone. "He left this behind when he disappeared. I found recordings on it. Hours of recordings. She handed me the device with trembling fingers. The screen showed a folder labeled Insurance. I pressed play on the first file. Dalton's voice filled the room. Day 847 of marriage to Caroline. The kid's 16 now, still completely clueless about her heritage. Phase 1 is working perfectly. I've convinced Caroline that the Ashworth family would steal the girl if they knew she existed. Meanwhile, I've been quietly acquiring property adjacent to the mansion, waiting for my opportunity. My blood turned to ice. Another recording. Day 1205. The girl got into Harvard today. Caroline's celebrating, but I see the real opportunity here. Harvard Law will give her connections to the old money families. If I play this right, I can use her success to finally get inside Ashworth social circles. And another, day 2190. She's graduated law school. Time for phase 2. I need to break her down completely, make her desperate to prove herself. The more I tear her apart, the harder she'll work to succeed. And the more successful she becomes, the more valuable she is to my long-term plan. I dropped the phone like it was on fire. How long have you known? I asked. I found these recordings 3 days ago, Mom whispered. I confronted him that night. He laughed and told me everything. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Dalton's been planning this for 20 years. He married me to get close to you. He's been systematically destroying your confidence so you'd work harder to prove yourself. He wanted you to become successful enough to buy this house someday. Why would he want that? Mom's face crumpled. Because once you owned it, he planned to contest Teddy's will. There's a provision that if any Ashworth descendant reclaims the family home, they automatically inherit the entire Ashworth trust. It's worth $47 million. The papers scattered across the marble floor as I stood up too quickly. He was going to steal my inheritance? He had lawyers ready to file paternity suits claiming you weren't really Teddy's daughter. He was going to drag you through courts for years while he controlled the property as your legal guardian since we were still married. I walked to the towering windows overlooking the gardens, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. 24 years of my life had been orchestrated by a man who saw me as nothing more than a key to unlock someone else's fortune. The voicemail, I said suddenly. What voicemail? I pulled out my phone and played Dalton's graduation night message for Mom. Her face went ashen as his words filled the room. He was breaking me down on purpose, I realized, making sure I'd be motivated to succeed no matter what, while planning to steal everything you achieved. I stared at the architectural drawings scattered on the floor. My father's careful measurements and detailed notes covered every page. In the margins, he'd written little messages. Baby's room, lots of natural light, and future playground area, and reading nook for bedtime stories. This house wasn't just where I live now. It was supposed to be where I grew up. What else is in the envelope? I asked. Mom helped me gather the papers. Underneath the architectural plans, I found a leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with TJA, Theodore James Ashworth. I opened it to the first page. For my daughter, the elegant handwriting began, so she'll know how much she was wanted. The journal detailed Teddy's excitement about becoming a father. He'd documented every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every plan he had for our future. He'd written letters to me for different milestones. My first day of school, my graduation, my wedding day. One entry made my hands shake. Caroline told me today that she wants to name our daughter after her grandmother. But I have a secret wish. I hope she'll want to be an architect like her old man. I'm designing our family home with a special office space, just in case she inherits my love of building beautiful things. Whether she becomes an architect or a doctor or anything else, I want her to know that this house will always be hers. No matter what happens to me, she'll always have a place where she belongs. Tears blurred my vision as I read page after page of letters Teddy had written to me. Letters I was supposed to receive as I grew up. Letters that explained my inheritance, my family history, my rightful place in the world. The final entry was dated 2 days before his death. Something's wrong with the construction site. The safety inspector has been asking questions about the foundation work. I'm going to check it personally tomorrow morning. If anything happens to me, I need Caroline to know. The blue folder in my office safe contains everything our daughter will need to claim her inheritance when she turns 25. The combination is her birthday. Tell her that her father loved her more than all the buildings in the world. I looked up at Mom. Did you ever get a blue folder? She shook her head. I never even knew about a safe. Where was his office? Downtown, in the Merchants Building. But that was torn down years ago to build... She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. To build what? Dalton's headquarters. He bought the lot and demolished the building in 2003. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Dalton hadn't just known about my inheritance. He'd actively destroyed the evidence of it. He'd bought my father's office building and torn it down, ensuring I'd never find the documentation I needed to claim what was rightfully mine. We need to call the police, Mom said. And tell them what? That my stepfather psychologically manipulated me for 20 years? That he demolished a building to hide evidence of an inheritance? Even if it's all true, what crime has he actually committed? I was a lawyer. I knew the difference between moral wrongs and legal violations. Besides, I added, standing up and walking to Teddy's architectural drawings, he made one crucial mistake. What's that? I spread the blueprints across the mahogany dining table. He assumed the safe was in Teddy's office building, but look at this. I pointed to a detailed drawing of the mansion's ground floor. In one corner, there was a small room labeled Private Study, with detailed specifications for a built-in safe. Teddy had a safe here, in this house. Mom rushed to look over my shoulder. Are you sure? The measurements are all here. Behind the bookshelf in the study, there should be a wall safe. The combination is my birthday. We practically ran to the study. The room was exactly as Teddy had designed it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, tall windows overlooking the gardens. I pulled books off the shelf, searching for any sign of a hidden safe. Behind a collection of architectural textbooks, my fingers found a small metal handle. I pulled, and an entire section of the bookshelf swung open on hidden hinges. There it was, a wall safe, exactly as Teddy had drawn it. I entered my birthday, 031595. The safe clicked open. Inside was a blue folder, exactly as Teddy had promised. My hands shook as I opened it. The first document was a will, dated 1 week before my birth. Theodore James Ashworth left everything, his construction company, his personal property, and the entirety of the Ashworth family trust, to his daughter. But there was more, much more. Bank statements showing an account containing $47.3 million held in trust until I turned 25. Stock certificates for Ashworth Construction, which apparently still existed as a subsidiary of a larger corporation. Property deeds for 18 buildings downtown, including the lot where Dalton's headquarters now stood. And at the bottom of the folder, a letter addressed to me. "My dearest daughter," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and your mother has found the strength to give you the truth. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you grow up, but I want you to know that everything I built was always meant to be yours. The Ashworth family has owned land in this city for 200 years. We've built schools, hospitals, churches, and homes. We've always believed that true wealth comes not from what you own, but from what you create for others. I'm leaving you more than money, sweetheart. I'm leaving you a legacy of building beautiful things that make people's lives better. Whether you choose to continue that tradition or create your own path, know that you'll always have the resources to build whatever dreams you can imagine. The combination to our family's main trust account is your mother's birthday. The account managers at First National Bank have been instructed to release everything to you on your 25th birthday, or immediately upon presentation of this letter if you're older than that. Build beautiful things, my daughter. And know that your father loved you beyond measure. With all my love, Teddy." I was 26 years old. I was past the inheritance age. "We need to go to the bank," I told Mom. "Right now? It's past 8 in the evening. First thing tomorrow morning." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room of the mansion, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just a house I'd bought to spite Dalton. This was my birthright. Every carved banister, every hand-painted ceiling, every ornate doorknob had been chosen by my father for his daughter's future home. The next morning, Mom and I arrived at First National Bank when it opened. I brought Teddy's letter, the will, and every piece of identification I owned. The account manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a woman in her 60s who'd apparently been expecting me for years. "Miss Ashworth," she said with a warm smile, "your father set this account up specifically for this day. We've been managing your trust according to his instructions." "I need to see everything," I said. She led us to a private conference room and returned with a stack of documents that took my breath away. The Ashworth Trust hadn't just sat dormant for 26 years. It had been actively managed, invested, and grown. "Your current balance is $73.8 million, Mrs. Rodriguez said matter-of-factly. I nearly fainted. "The original trust was $47.3 million, as you can see from your father's documents. But Mr. Ashworth left very specific investment instructions. He wanted to ensure that by the time you inherited, you'd have enough resources to continue the family's philanthropic work on a significant scale." She showed me spreadsheets detailing decades of carefully managed investments. Teddy had essentially turned my inheritance into a perpetual wealth-building machine. "There's also this," Mrs. Rodriguez said, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your father left instructions that this should only be opened when you claimed your inheritance." Inside was a single key and an address downtown. "What's at this address?" I asked. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "Why don't you go see for yourself?" An hour later, Mom and I stood outside a nondescript office building in the financial district. I used Teddy's key to open a door marked Ashworth Holdings, Suite 412. Inside was a fully functional architectural firm, drafting tables, computer workstations, a conference room with building models lining the walls. And on the main desk, a photograph of me as a baby, sitting on Teddy's lap while he showed me building plans. A note was pinned underneath the photo. "Welcome to your inheritance, sweetheart. Ashworth Construction has been waiting for you to come home." I walked to the window overlooking the city. From this vantage point, I could see at least a dozen buildings with small bronze plaques marking them as Ashworth Constructions. Schools, libraries, community centers. My father's legacy was literally built into the landscape of our city. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this the new owner of the Magnolia Street mansion?" The voice was elderly, refined. "Yes, this is she." "Miss, my name is Wellington Ashworth. I believe I'm your great-uncle." My knees buckled. I grabbed the desk for support. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you," he continued. "Would you be available for lunch today? There's quite a lot we need to discuss about the family business." 3 hours later, I sat in the private dining room of the city's most exclusive club, staring at a man who looked exactly like the photographs of my father, only 40 years older. Wellington Ashworth was 83, impeccably dressed, and absolutely delighted to finally meet me. "Teddy was my nephew," he explained over perfectly prepared salmon. "Brilliant architect. Wonderful man. His death devastated our entire family. Why didn't anyone ever contact me?" Wellington's expression grew sad. "We tried. Your mother changed her name, moved several times, and eventually married that construction fellow who made it very clear we weren't welcome. We hired investigators, but she was quite determined to stay hidden." "You knew about Dalton?" "Oh, we knew everything about Dalton Pierce." Wellington's voice carried a note of steel. "Including his recent disappearance with your mother's money?" I nearly choked on my water. "How could you possibly know that?" "My dear girl, The Ashworth family has been in business for 2 centuries. We keep track of threats to our interests. And Dalton Pierce has been a threat to you specifically for 20 years. Wellington reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. We've been documenting his activities since 2004. His systematic psychological abuse, his destruction of your father's office building, his long-term plan to steal your inheritance. We were simply waiting for you to discover the truth yourself. You could have stopped him years ago and robbed you of the satisfaction of defeating him yourself. Wellington smiled. Your father always said you'd be formidable. We wanted to see if he was right. I stared at this elegant man who'd been watching my life unfold from a distance. What happens now? Now, you decide what you want to do with the most powerful construction and development company in the state. Ashworth Holdings owns or controls approximately 30% of all commercial real estate in this city. We have pending contracts worth $200 million and a reputation for building projects that serve the community good. He slid a portfolio across the table. These are projects your father designed before he died, but we never built because we were waiting for you. Community housing for low-income families, a children's hospital, a public library system, a scholarship program for promising young architects. The drawings were breathtaking. Teddy had envisioned developments that would transform entire neighborhoods while maintaining their character and charm. The question is, Wellington continued, are you ready to be an Ashworth? I thought about Dalton's voicemail, still saved on my phone. The one where he called me worthless and predicted I'd come crawling back begging for handouts. What about Dalton? I asked. Wellington's smile turned predatory. What about him? He destroyed evidence, manipulated my mother, stole money, and fled the state with $2.3 million in assets that belonged to your mother. I raised an eyebrow. How do you know the exact amount? Because we've been tracking every account he opened, every investment he made, every dollar he moved. The man is remarkably predictable. Wellington pulled out his phone and showed me a GPS location. He's currently at a resort in the Cayman Islands, living quite comfortably on your mother's money. Can we get it back? My dear, we can do much better than that. Wellington made a phone call. Within 10 minutes, a young woman in a business suit joined us at the table. This is Patricia Chen, our head of security operations, Wellington said. Patricia, please update Miss Ashworth on the Dalton Pierce situation. Patricia opened her laptop. Mr. Pierce made several crucial errors when he fled. First, he used his real passport, making him easy to track. Second, he deposited the stolen funds in accounts tied to his social security number. Third, he's been using credit cards connected to those accounts. The screen showed detailed financial records. We've documented every transaction he's made since leaving. Hotel bills, restaurant charges, equipment rentals. He's living exactly like someone who thinks he got away with something. What's the plan? I asked. Wellington leaned forward. The Cayman Islands have very specific laws about international financial crimes. If someone can prove that funds were obtained through fraud and transported across international borders for the purpose of avoiding U.S. law enforcement, those funds can be frozen immediately. And we can prove fraud? Patricia clicked to another screen. We have Dalton's recorded admissions about his 20-year plan to defraud you. We have evidence that he systematically destroyed legal documents. We have proof that he married your mother under false pretenses specifically to access your inheritance. She pulled up a legal document. We've already filed preliminary paperwork with international authorities. The moment you sign this complaint, Dalton's accounts will be frozen and he'll be detained for questioning. I stared at the papers. After 20 years of psychological torture, I could end Dalton's freedom with a signature. What happens to the money? Returned to your mother immediately, Wellington said, along with interest and penalties that Dalton will be responsible for paying. And Dalton will spend a very long time in a Cayman Islands prison, followed by extradition to face fraud charges here. I picked up the pen. Wait, I said. I want to do this differently. Wellington raised an eyebrow. I want Dalton to know exactly who destroyed him. I pulled out my phone and called the number I'd memorized years ago, Dalton's personal cell phone. He answered on the second ring. What do you want? Hello, Dalton. I'm calling to thank you. Silence. Thank you for teaching me exactly what I was worth. It turns out I'm worth $73.8 million, plus a construction empire, plus the satisfaction of watching you rot in prison. You're bluffing. Patricia, can you read Mr. Pierce the charges we're filing? Patricia took the phone. Dalton Pierce, you're being charged with international fraud, theft by deception, destruction of legal documents, and conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud. Cayman Islands authorities have been notified and should be arriving at your hotel within the hour. I took the phone back. Remember when you said I'd come crawling back begging for handouts? Well, I'm back, but not begging. I signed the legal documents while Dalton screamed threats through the phone. Oh, and Dalton? That graduation voicemail you left me? I'm having it played at your fraud trial. Seems like relevant evidence of your mental state and long-term intentions. I hung up. Wellington was grinning. Your father would be so proud. Within an hour, Patricia received confirmation that Dalton had been detained. Within 6 hours, all of his accounts were frozen. Within 24 hours, the stolen money was being returned to Mom's account, but I wasn't finished. Wellington, I want to buy something. What's that? Every piece of property Dalton owns. Wellington looked intrigued. That could be expensive. I have $73.8 million. I think I can afford it. It took 3 days of legal maneuvering, but by Friday afternoon, I owned Dalton's construction company, his office building, his personal residence, and the vacant lot where he'd planned to build his retirement home. Saturday morning, I stood in Dalton's former office with a crew of demolition experts. Everything must go, I told the foreman. I want this building completely razed. What are you planning to build here? He asked. I showed him the architectural plans I'd found in Teddy's journal. A community center, with a children's library, after-school programs, and free legal aid services. The demolition took 6 hours. I watched from across the street as Dalton's empire crumbled into dust. My phone rang. It was Mom. "The bank called," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The money's back. All of it. Plus interest. Plus some kind of settlement payment for emotional damages. How much total?" "3.7 million. I smiled. "What do you want to do with it?" "I want to go back to school," she said immediately. "I always wanted to be a teacher, but Dalton convinced me I wasn't smart enough. I want to prove him wrong. Consider your tuition paid." 2 years later, I stood at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Theodore James Ashworth Community Hospital. Mom was there, radiant in her new role as a high school teacher. Wellington stood beside me, beaming with pride. The crowd included families who would benefit from the free medical clinic, students who'd received Ashworth Foundation scholarships, and community leaders who'd supported the project. As I spoke to the gathered crowd about my father's vision for buildings that served people rather than profit, I noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from the bank, holding a young girl's hand. After the ceremony, she approached me. "Miss Ashworth, I wanted to thank you. My granddaughter was selected for one of your architecture scholarships." The little girl, maybe 8 years old, stepped forward shyly. "Are you really going to teach me how to build houses?" I knelt down to her level. "Would you like to learn?" She nodded enthusiastically. "Then yes, I'm going to teach you to build beautiful things that make people happy." As they walked away, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Wellington. "Teddy would be proud," he said quietly. I thought about the graduation voicemail still saved on my phone, the one where Dalton called me worthless. I'd kept it all these years as motivation, but I realized I didn't need it anymore. I deleted the file. Some things are worth remembering, some things are worth forgetting, and some things are worth building from scratch. 3 years after that first groundbreaking, I stood in the lobby of the completed Theodore James Ashworth Community Hospital. The walls were lined with photos showing the construction process, and at the center was a bronze plaque. This building was designed by Theodore James Ashworth for his daughter, so that she might continue the family tradition of creating beautiful spaces that serve others. Completed 2024 in memory of all the dreams that love makes possible. That evening, I walked through the mansion on Magnolia Street one final time before moving out. I donated the house to the city with the stipulation that it be converted into a center for architecture education and community planning. Local students would take classes there. Community groups would use it for meetings about neighborhood development projects. Young architects would have access to Teddy's original drawings and journals as inspiration for their own work. I'd kept only one room for myself, the study where I'd first found Teddy's safe. That would remain as my office when I was in town between projects. My new home was a simple apartment above the foundation offices. It had everything I needed: a place to sleep, a small kitchen, and large windows overlooking the city where 4 generations of Ashworths had built beautiful things for other people. As I packed my few remaining possessions, I came across something I'd forgotten about: the old cell phone containing Dalton's recordings about his 20-year plan to destroy me. I sat on my new couch holding the device that had once represented the lowest point of my life. Those recordings had revealed the depth of Dalton's manipulation, but they'd also revealed something else: his complete misunderstanding of what made life valuable. Dalton had spent 20 years plotting to steal money. In that same time, I'd learned to build communities. He'd worked to destroy one person's confidence. I'd learned to build other people's capabilities. He'd focused on taking something that already existed. I'd learned to create things that had never existed before. I deleted the recordings and put the phone away. Some battles are won not by defeating your enemy, but by becoming so far beyond their reach that they can no longer touch you. That evening, Wellington called with an update on our newest project. "The community center is ahead of schedule," he said. 3 neighborhoods have requested similar facilities, and we're getting inquiries from other cities about replicating the model. I smiled, thinking about how Teddy would have loved hearing about innovative community projects spreading to help more people. "Wellington, I think we figured out how to do something my father never imagined." "What's that?" "We've learned how to build hope." 5 years later, I stood in a classroom in rural Guatemala, watching a 16-year-old named Rosa teach basic engineering principles to a group of women from her village. The school where we were meeting had been constructed entirely by community members, using techniques they'd learned through our international development program. But more importantly, it had sparked something unexpected: a network of villages that now collaborated on infrastructure projects across the region. The Ashworth Foundation had grown beyond what any of us imagined. We now operated educational and construction programs in 12 countries, always focused on teaching communities to build their own solutions rather than creating dependency on outside aid. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Graduation day. My adult literacy students are receiving their certificates tonight. Teddy would be proud of both his girls." That evening, I walked through the Guatemalan village, watching families gather in the community center they'd built with their own hands. Children played in the playground that teenage apprentices had designed and constructed. Adults discussed plans for expanding the regional healthcare clinic they were collaborating on with neighboring villages. As I watched these interactions, I realized something profound about my father's legacy. Teddy hadn't just designed buildings. He'd designed a philosophy that architecture should serve people, that communities should control their own development, and that the most beautiful thing you can build is opportunity for others. I pulled out my phone and called Wellington. "I want to do something," I said when he answered. "What's that?" "I want to establish a permanent endowment, something that will fund community development projects long after I'm gone." "How large an endowment?" I thought about the 73.8 million I'd inherited, the profits from 5 years of successful construction projects, and the returns on investments Wellington had been managing. "Everything. I want to donate everything except what I need to live simply." Wellington was quiet for a long moment. That would be approximately $180 million. With proper management, that should generate enough annual income to fund community building projects indefinitely. You'd be giving up the ability to live luxuriously for the rest of your life. I looked around at the village celebration, at children playing games their grandparents had taught them, at adults planning new projects that would benefit their neighbors' children. Wellington, I'm already living more luxuriously than any person could ask for. 6 months later, I stood in the Theodore James Ashworth Foundation headquarters, signing the papers that would transform my personal inheritance into a permanent global resource for community development. The endowment would generate approximately $9 million annually, enough to support community building programs in 30 countries while maintaining a growing principle that would increase the foundation's capacity over time. Mom was there for the signing, along with Wellington and Patricia, who'd become the foundation's operational director. Your father would be amazed, Mom said, as I signed the final document. Not amazed, I corrected. Proud. He always expected his daughter to be formidable. That afternoon, I received a call that brought the story full circle. It was from the Cayman Islands prison system. Dalton Pierce was requesting a meeting. I almost hung up immediately, but something made me hesitate. What does he want? I asked the prison administrator. He says he has information about other fraud schemes that might help recover money for victims, but he'll only speak to you. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Dalton in a sterile prison visiting. He looked older, thinner, and somehow smaller than I remembered. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. What do you want, Dalton? To apologize, and to give you information about other families I targeted over the years. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were detailed records of at least a dozen families he'd researched and manipulated, all with similar patterns to what he'd done to Mom and me. These families deserve to know the truth, he said, and some of them might be entitled to recover stolen assets. I studied the documents. Each case showed the same methodical approach: background research, strategic relationship building, psychological manipulation, and long-term financial exploitation. Why are you giving me this? Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Because I've had 8 years to think about what I did, about the pain I caused, about the opportunities I destroyed, and I realized that the person I hurt most was myself. I spent 20 years of my life focused on taking things from other people instead of building anything meaningful. I thought about the community center that now stood where his office building used to be, about the children who used the library every day, about the families who received free legal aid in the space where he used to plan his schemes. What do you want me to do with this information? Whatever you think is right. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just want to do one thing that helps instead of hurts. I took the folder. Dalton, people can change. But change has to be proven over time, not just promised in a conversation. I know. If you're serious about making amends, there are ways to contribute positively from where you are. Prison education programs, counseling for other inmates who've committed fraud, using your business knowledge to help people instead of exploit them. Would you be willing to let me know how the foundation's work progresses? Not because I deserve to know, but because it would help me understand what I could have built, instead of what I chose to destroy. I looked at this man who'd shaped so much of my early life through cruelty and manipulation, who was now asking to learn about the constructive work that had emerged from overcoming his attempts to break me. I'll send you annual reports, I said. And if you're genuinely committed to positive change, maybe someday we can find a way for you to contribute to community development instead of community destruction. As I left the prison, I realized that this conversation represented something important about the philosophy that now guided my life. Even people who cause tremendous harm have the potential to contribute positively if they're willing to change, and if they're given appropriate opportunities to demonstrate that change. The drive back to the airport gave me time to think about how completely my life had been transformed. Dalton's cruelty had been intended to break me down, but it had instead built up my resilience, work ethic, and determination to succeed. His attempt to steal my inheritance had led me to discover my father's legacy and embrace a mission much larger than individual wealth accumulation. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the foundation for the best things we build. A year later, I stood in a community center in Detroit, watching neighborhood residents celebrate the completion of their third major construction project. The building we were in had been designed and built entirely by local residents, using skills they'd learned through the Ashworth Foundation's domestic programs. These weren't just construction projects. They were demonstrations of what communities could accomplish when they had access to resources, training, and the confidence to solve their own problems. My phone rang. It was Mom, calling from her high school classroom. "How's the Detroit project going?" she asked. "Better than we hoped. The communities here are incredible. Give them tools and training and they create solutions we never would have thought of." That sounds like something Teddy would have said. I smiled, watching teenagers teach construction skills to adults, seeing neighbors work together on projects that would benefit families they'd never met. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how he designed buildings for people he'd never meet, in circumstances he couldn't predict. What do you mean? The community development work we're doing isn't really about architecture. It's about giving people confidence in their own abilities, teaching them that they can solve their own problems. Mom was quiet for a moment. That's exactly what you needed when you were growing up with Dalton. I'd never made that connection before, but she was right. Dalton had spent years convincing me I was worthless, that I needed his approval to succeed. The community development work was essentially teaching people the opposite lesson, that they had inherent worth and capability. Mom, I think I understand something now. What's that? Dalton thought power came from making other people feel small, but actual power comes from helping other people realize how strong they already are. After we hung up, I walked through the neighborhood, seeing evidence of the community development work everywhere. Gardens that residents had designed and built, small businesses that neighbors had started cooperatively, playgrounds that teenagers had constructed while learning job skills. Each project represented families who'd learned that they didn't have to wait for outside help to improve their lives. They could improve their lives themselves, working together. As the sun set over Detroit, I realized that we'd accidentally discovered how to build something more important than schools or community centers. We'd learned how to build democracy itself, not the kind practiced in voting booths once every few years, but the kind practiced daily through neighbors working together to solve shared problems. That evening, I sat in my hotel room and began writing in a journal I'd started keeping. Letters to my father, telling him about the work that had grown from his original vision of architecture serving people rather than profit. Dear Teddy, I wrote, today I watched people build more than a community center. They built trust, skills, relationships, and hope. They learned that they don't have to wait for permission to make their lives better. I think this is what you meant when you said buildings should help people realize their own potential. The next morning, I flew home to find a letter waiting for me. It was from the prison in the Cayman Islands. Dalton had started teaching business skills to other inmates, helping them develop legitimate plans for supporting themselves after release. He'd also been working with prison administrators to improve the education programs, using his project management experience to make the classes more effective. The letter included a note from the prison education director. Mr. Pierce has become one of our most valuable volunteers. His business knowledge and organizational skills have significantly improved our job training programs. More importantly, his personal experience with fraud has made him very effective at counseling inmates about the long-term consequences of exploitative behavior. Attached was a brief note from Dalton. Thank you for the Foundation's annual report. Reading about the community development work helps me understand what I could have accomplished if I'd focused on building instead of taking. I hope someday I can contribute to this work instead of being remembered only for undermining it. I filed the letter away, thinking about how even the most destructive people sometimes find ways to become constructive, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because allowing people to change serves everyone's interests. That afternoon, I received a call that would shape the next chapter of my life. It was from the United Nations. They wanted to discuss expanding the Ashworth Foundation's community development approach to serve as a model for international development programs worldwide. We've been studying your outcomes, the caller explained. Communities that learn to build their own infrastructure show dramatically better results on every measure: education, health, economic development, political stability. How large an expansion are you thinking? Potentially hundreds of communities across dozens of countries. But we want to ensure that growth doesn't compromise the community-controlled principles that make your approach effective. I thought about Teddy's belief that architecture should serve people, about the communities in Guatemala and Detroit that had learned to solve their own problems, about the possibility of spreading these principles globally. Let's talk, I said. 6 months later, I stood before the United Nations General Assembly, explaining how community-controlled development could address challenges that traditional aid programs had struggled with for decades. The key insight, I told the assembled representatives, is that the goal isn't to build schools and hospitals for communities. The goal is to help communities build schools and hospitals for themselves. I clicked to photographs showing projects from around the world, villages in Guatemala, neighborhoods in Detroit, refugee camps in Kenya, rural communities in Bangladesh. When people learn they can construct a school, they start believing they can solve other problems too. When they practice democratic decision-making about building projects, they develop skills for democratic governance in other areas. When they control their own development process, they create sustainable prosperity instead of temporary dependency. The presentation concluded with a proposal for the largest community development initiative in history, a 20-year program that would teach community-controlled building techniques to 10,000 villages and neighborhoods across 50 countries. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in my life, I'd accomplished something that even my father's wildest dreams hadn't imagined. That evening, I called Mom from my hotel room in New York. How did the UN presentation go? She asked. We're going to help build a world where every community has the tools to solve its own problems. She was quiet for a moment. Teddy would be so proud. I keep thinking about something he wrote in his journal, about leaving the world more beautiful than you found it. What's beautiful about this project isn't just the buildings, Mom said. It's the fact that people will build them for themselves. As I looked out my hotel window at the lights of Manhattan, each representing families and communities with their own dreams and challenges, I realized that the graduation voicemail that had motivated me for so many years was finally irrelevant. Dalton had called me worthless, predicting I'd come crawling back begging for handouts. Instead, I'd learned to create value, not just for myself, but for thousands of communities around the world. Some people spend their lives trying to prove they matter. Others spend their lives making sure that everyone matters. I was finally ready to be the daughter Teddy had dreamed of.